Hey everybody, Michael Snyder, Pacific Northwest Weather Watch. Today is January 5th, and right now we are looking at the infrared satellite imagery. You can see our powerful frontal system driving into western BC. Cold air associated behind it. It's going to drop down across much of the Pacific Northwest, bringing heavy mountain snows with it. But what everybody wants to know about is that extended forecast. And as we look off into next week, some Arctic air is going to be building here across western Canada. How much of that will spill down into the Pacific Northwest? We'll dive into those details as we go through the video this morning. Hazardous beach conditions here over the next few days, week to 10-day period, really large breaking waves, especially when these correlate with high tides, and the highest wave Saturday morning, but we're going to have multiple rounds of it here as well. Beach erosion is possible. Do not turn your back on the ocean, and this goes from BC, Washington, all the way down the California coastline as well. Snow Saturday into Saturday evening. Check out Crater Lake up towards a foot, and there's a 70% chance of snow rates exceeding 1 inch per hour in the Cascades. Heaviest snow from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. Saturday, at least for the Oregon Cascades, and then the lower snow levels arrive here as we go on in through Sunday afternoon with some slick conditions still remaining. High sneaker wave threat again up and down the coastline. Nice graphic here from Portland National Weather Service is trying to drill this into everybody's head. This is going to be ongoing here for the next week to 2 weeks, most likely. Here we go with Spokane National Weather Service. Look at that, 2 to 3 inches for Spokane. Look at Stevens Pass, 12 to 18. Some big amounts across the higher terrain here, and we're going to be having multiple rounds of this as well, and that Arctic air could help to really build that snow across the higher terrain. But we could also be having some lower elevation snowfall. We'll look at that here in a moment, but we're not going to get caught up in details just yet. We're just going to go over a couple scenarios. Looking at the NAM 3KM, here's the hot off the presses NAM 3KM look, and you can see that you've got that snow flying across the Cascades here, pushing down across the Oregon Cascades, that cooler air mass ushering in across the western USA as we go through Sunday morning, and then our eyes will start to turn towards that Arctic air building across western Canada. Lots more on that here in a moment. Looking at the NAM 12KM, though, at about 2,500 feet, this is that frontal system. I just like to show the visual diagram of that cooler air. You can see it swooping down with that frontal system here as we go through the day tomorrow, kind of engulfing much of the west coast here. Just like to show you guys that visual representation of that cold air. Now, looking at the GFS here. So we're going to scroll through this fairly fast because I just want to kind of give you the bigger picture here on what we're dealing with over the next couple of weeks. And you can see plentiful snowfall amounts across the higher terrain. In fact, we're going to peg the scale across a lot of areas of western BC, Washington Cascades, all the way down through the Oregon Cascades, some of the Rockies as well. Now we're up towards 200 hours as I stop right there, and look at these amounts, and we really need it because we're below average across much of the west here. So definitely looking good as far as snow for the higher terrain. Now, lower elevation snowfall is much more uncertain here, and it's going to develop based on this Arctic high and how much of that Arctic air spills out over the Pacific Ocean, what kind of cyclogenesis we get, and we'll dive into some of those details as we get into the future days here. But again, they're going to be changing rapidly right up until the event potentially as we go through next week. Now, looking at a wider view, you got Alaska, BC, Washington. This is this morning's GFS, hot off the presses versus yesterday afternoon's. Put that into motion. Here goes our system driving across the area today, tomorrow, and on in through Sunday. And then we start to get these polar lobes out here dancing across western Canada, and they continue to show a favorable path for some lower elevation snowfall into the Pacific Northwest. Again, last night's run here, and then you can see this morning's here. Some of these runs are old school Arctic outbreaks here, folks. This is really favorable for some very cold air making it into the Pacific Northwest and also developing its own storm off the coastline of BC, Washington, and Oregon, and bringing some interesting amounts of snow all the way down to sea level potentially here. And it could also hang on for a while. Some of the weather models are showing this very cold air hanging on all the way through mid-January. So we'll see how that develops as we go day by day. Here's yesterday afternoon's European run, and take a look there. You can see the frontal system rolling through here as we go through the weekend, and then the polar lobes start dancing. And again, very dynamic polar lobe opening right up on the Pacific Northwest. Old school Arctic outbreak possible here, folks, but you got to use caution because this is a very fickle forecast with these polar lobes. They can change direction quite quickly here, but the confidence is definitely increasing on some very cold air coming in here for the Pacific Northwest, and then just some wild solutions off in the future, this flow reversal and just all kinds of crazy stuff. We'll worry about that later, though, one thing at a time. We got plenty to look at here in the meantime, and this is last night's European. I want to kind of show you the confidence is increasing with that system going through this weekend, of course, high confidence in that, but then that polar lobe activity here across Western Canada, lots of cold air being stored up here, and then you can kind of see it taking a swing right at the end of its run there. So yeah, confidence definitely increasing. Now let's take a look at the ensembles, because you can always look at those deterministic runs and kind of find those kind of wild runs out there, and they can be outliers in of themselves. And as we take a look at the European yesterday afternoon versus the GFS ensemble mean here, as we go out into the future here, you'll clearly see that cold air really building up across western BC here, sagging south across southern BC in a favorable trajectory for some cyclogenesis and potential for some snowfall and very cold temperatures across Pacific Northwest. Now, here's the European yesterday afternoon versus the GFS. What would actually happen in some of these scenarios? So here goes our frontal system as it drops down across the area tonight to tomorrow morning, moves out on Sunday, and then we start to get another system in advance of that Arctic air. But look as we go towards Wednesday and Thursday, look at this gradient, both the GFS and the European model. That's that boundary of that Arctic air, and then it starts to spill out over the Pacific Ocean here, and it's going to create its own weather. As cold air is going to come out over the relatively warm Pacific Ocean here and develop a low pressure center, and you can see it both on the GFS and the European model here, and that would spread snow back up over this very chilly air mass. Outflow winds, we'd have a frontal passage here potentially with rapid wind shift from south to north across some of the Puget Sound. The Fraser River Gap would be going, Okanagan River Gap, Purcell Trench. We would just be flooding the west with Arctic air, and then you can see that system move down across much of the west, and there would be a extremely cold air mass in place at this point as we go on in towards next weekend. Now, looking at 80-meter wind speed here. So I want to scroll ahead here and kind of show you something that would be coming. What we've got on the right here is a 2-meter dew point temperature here, and Arctic air is characterized by just how extremely dry and cold it is. So we're now out towards about Tuesday morning coming up, and you can see a strong system off the coastline there with the Arctic air still across some of central and northern BC and some of Alberta there, but you can see it quickly start to sag south there as we go through the day Wednesday, and then it wants to spill off the continent there and really get some of the cyclogenesis going. You can see the Fraser River outflow starting at this point. Then you can see the Okanagan River get going. And if you look really close across the Puget Sound, you can kind of see that wind shift from south to north. That would be an Arctic frontal passage. And look at the dew point temperature. It goes from the mid-30s, all of a sudden just plummets down into the teens for some of the Puget Sound here. Then eventually this progresses down across a lot of Oregon as well. And if we go off towards the weekend, look at this massively dry air mass, just classic Arctic air mass set up across much of the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, we're starting to get a little bit real here, folks. So confidence definitely increasing. I know I've said that a few times already, trying to drill home that point. Looking at 2-meter temperature anomaly, what would we be looking at temperature-wise here without getting into some extreme detail on just what kind of temperatures you can expect? You can see the Arctic air. Look at that European and the GFS. Very good agreement with some well below normal temperatures here. Again, this is an anomaly here. So you can see some areas 30, 40 degrees below what you would normally be at this time of year. And mid-January, it's not like we're looking at a warm time of the year here. Mid-January is really peak winter season here across much of the Pacific Northwest. So these are very noticeable 2-meter temperature anomalies, and just look at how it just engulfs much of the west here. So yeah, time to start getting excited here. I'll probably be doing a live stream at some point, I imagine, in the next few days. If this continues to trend so strongly, I've got to go to the doctor today, though. I think this has kind of turned bacterial in my sinuses. I've been having a hard time getting the video out this morning. I've had to restart because I've been going through some serious coughing fits. But anyway, things are going to be ramping up here, and I'll probably be putting out 1 or 2 videos a day at least coming up if I can manage it. Now, looking at the European on the left versus the GFS on the right, this kind of gives you a good visual representation of just how fickle these polar lobes can be. But as we go on in through that mid and later week period here, you can see that polar lobe reach out there. But you can imagine if this gets cut off or moves east a little bit, that trajectory becomes much less favorable. So a little bit of reality here for us in the Pacific Northwest, even though the GFS and the European have been showing that polar lobe reaching out and getting much of the Pacific Northwest here in this cold air moving out over the Pacific Ocean. That is still subject to change at this time period. Now, looking at last night's European run, just kind of letting this roll all the way out towards the end of the run, and you can see not much has been changing run to run here. Some very cold air setting up shop across Western Canada. Now, looking at 6 to 10 day, of course, the Climate Prediction Center is picking up on this as we go through January 14th. This is a significant wave height and direction, just showing you we're going to have some elevated wave action. A little bit of a break here as we go through Monday, it looks like. But again, that wave action is going to really be picking up here as we go through the early and midweek period upcoming. Then look at that Arctic air kind of spilling off the coastline there as well. Kind of an interesting looking feature there also. But yeah, it's lots to talk about here. We'll start to get into detail more here probably in a couple of days. As long as this continues to show, we can start to finally dive into some more details on who's going to get what. But right now, it's still kind of a fool's errand here. These can be extremely dynamic. You just get the subtle troughing off the coastline here, and it can really affect different areas like Seattle or Portland or Southwest BC much differently. If the Arctic air comes in super hot and heavy, it can cut off snowfall across Southwest BC pretty quickly, and it can set up some interesting low pressure systems here across some of Southwest Washington or Oregon. And just depending exactly on the trajectory of that Arctic air, there's going to be a lot to work out here over the next few days. But right now, the confidence is definitely increasing for some Arctic air into the Pacific Northwest. So anyway, I'm going to get myself to the urgent care here before I start coughing again, and we'll wrap this up. I'll probably be putting an update out on Twitter at some point today. But anyway, yeah, hope you guys are liking these videos. Hope you guys are getting excited. Winter, it looks like it's on its way here, and this would be quite remarkable in its own sense just because it is a strong El Nino, and it's really been since about 1972 and January 1973, but since we've had an extended wintry period during a strong El Nino, so we might be making some history here as well over the next week or so. But anyway, yeah, we'll continue to break this down day by day. Hope you guys are having a good day out there, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.